and from that water, جُنُوبِ مَاءِ وِلَايَتِنَا يَحْزَنُونَ لِحُزْنِنَا, they are grieving فَرَحْنَا, they are happy in our happiness. And this kind is also a reflection of part of our branches of faith and practical faith. And they could miss so many prayers, and they still have an obligation to make those prayers. And so this is something that means as an obligation. However, it's missed to be great. And when it's done in its proper time, that's considered ada. He says the prayers do what the prayers of ada do. So there's a specific benefit and a special in some previous speeches. There's a hadith, for example, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he mentions about the benefit of each practicing them. Sometimes we see something that's wrong. A person does something that's wrong. And our reaction is a reaction that actually pushes them more away. Where the Prophet is saying that, where the Quran is explaining that one of the verses of the merciful Prophet was doing wrong in a way that he could guide them. Think about this. It's not a very complicated concept. If I'm nice to them, or they're more likely to listen to me, or someone who, if I'm yelling at them, it's very natural. Each and every one of us, we can understand this. If we make a mistake as an individual, how do we want someone to approach us? Do we want someone to humiliate us? Do we want someone to be loud to us? Do we want someone to try to be someone to approach us in this way? So says the Imam, he had this character where he would always approach people in a kind way. He wasn't harsh to them. It says once one of the politicians or the people, one of the statesmen of Medina, he had a problem with Imam Kadhim, and he would always say bad things. He was myself. And so the students or the companion accept, they say, we'll let the Imam handle it. The Imam goes to the arm of this man, he approaches him, he sits with him. It says he interacts with him in he completely takes away that guard of anger and indoors. In places where there was little interaction, distant lands, the most Muslim populated countries, this way in his akhlaq and how he dealt. The rights of God are with you at all times, in all aspects. كل حركة تحركتها. In every movement that you make, there's a right that God has over your movements. وَالسَّكَنَةً سَكَنَتَهَا. Every moment of stillness that you possess or you're in, that God has right over you in that moment. Every station in which you reside, every limb in which you employ, every instrument in which you use, that these are all rights that God has over a human. One of the things that we also see in this society, women did not have the right to vote. When even some women in this society, at least legally, it wasn't right for all races. And there's a lot of articles about this. And I want to focus on how this connects to this idea of egalitarianism in this society, or how we're being promoted, or called the doofus dad. A lot of sitcoms, a lot of people who are portrayed doofus dads, they call them. So they'll have the most popular, the Homer Simpson, for example, the long-running sitcom, complete idiot. And for all of the objectification of women, and by masking that, so let's at least, balance it out by making the father figures in our television shows people who were, pretty dumb and stupid. And then somebody might say, well, that's just, a show or something. Well, they couldn't do that the other way around. Could they have this same show where the mother of every show was looked at and doing these same idiotic things? They would not, socially would be considered unacceptable. But the reason why this can be acceptable is because it's creating a balance. People can laugh at that and make a joke about it, and then the commercials can come on and have women being objectified in different ways. You sell things in different ways. So this way of trying to cover up this inequality that's in society by masking it with some kind of idiot men in society, that doesn't fix the solution, rights of women's rights. This is bad, and you put perfume on it. It just tries to mask and make people not notice the stench that's underneath, the problem that's underneath, the foulness that's underneath. So the reality is, in the society, there isn't an equal right. It's not a fair standard by any means. But this is something that's being pushed in the society very widely. Then we look at it from an Islamic standpoint of lowering your gaze. And these are all for that protection entity of a woman's rights. And in order to establish true men's rights. Okay, so problem with this argument, it's like telling a tiger, you see that deer over there, lower your gaze. Don't approach it. Don't look at it. When human beings have animalistic side to them, and they have intellect as well, then they're at a tug of war with their self, with their carnal soul. They are battling their nafs. One part of them may want to have an animal inclination, and another part of them wants to do what's right. And maybe some people do that. Maybe some people actually lower their gaze. Blessing, very good. But what about those people that don't? What about the women that become victims of all kinds of transgressions because some people could not? Islam says we're not willing to take that risk. We don't want to see any instances where women are put into jeopardy in this way. We want to see protection and prevention of these harms. It says, what is the best medicine? Prevention. We don't want to wait to see what happens if some people are going to submit to their animal instincts or they're going to be more intellectual. We want to avoid that. We already know that there are people, and even if they seem to be high-powered politicians, that can't avoid grabbing people and doing things that they should not be doing, right? We've seen examples of people, from politicians to normal people, that suffer from this problem. Islam wants to give a protection to avoid this. You know, one of the things that was in the news not too long ago was the Harvard soccer team. It says that their whole season was canceled. Why was it canceled? The document. This is how foul, how low these people were. These are educated Harvard students, and they were succumbing to that themselves. It says we want to try to women from these. They have transgression done against them. So yes, in a lot of places in Muslim countries, they have women's Olympics, women's events. But guys are not allowed to sit there like the Harvard soccer team and do the things that they did and objectify women in this way. This is a right that Islam has given. So sometimes society goes way derailed off track and gets very distant from the way that what God intended. Someone said to Ayatollah Khomeini during the time of the revolution that you want to take Islam 1400 years back by what you're doing, or you want to take so many years back by what you're doing. And his response was, I actually go 1400 years back, meaning I want to go back to the time of pure Islam. I want to go back to the time where Islam was practiced in the way of the Prophet. I want to go back 1400 years to that time, before Islam became diluted, or the way that people practiced it became diluted with, a lot of different views, which may not necessarily be the views as intended by God. So we live, fast forward to today's society, we live in a society where people mock and ridicule, make fun of the woman who wants to cover herself. But if a woman wants to be completely objectified by men on TV, on radio, on billboards, then that's a freedom. Right? So we have a completely strange standard that is being upheld in today's society. Is that really women's rights? Or have men decided that should be your right, that we can objectify you? No, this is not something that Islam wants to uphold. And we look at all of these as just being examples that we have from our uswatun hasana, our perfect exemplar, in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And what we see is what they were always striving to maintain is this proper, pure essence of man, and not let this get corrupt, even when society may get corrupt. I want to give just a couple other examples of this. One is, we talked a little bit about how if you control the language, you control the narrative, right? Mentioned about how in society, one of the things that happens in the media, unfortunately, the words are distorted about, the reality of things. Instead of a beautiful thing, and that should be embraced and should be something that is considered modesty, something that's a protection for women, something that causes men to want to respect this woman. Instead of it being portrayed as that, it's being portrayed as a suffrage, as a oppression, as something that's taking away, from the right of women, when really it's something that has that's a liberation for women. A woman in society walking through hijab is not going to be objectified in the way that a woman walking half naked is going to be objectified in this society. Islam wants that right. Islam wants that sanctity. One of the words that's very popular, and some of this goes on viral, it goes on video. One knows what 2 seconds they take out of 1 hour lecture and make it into something negative. Something that negative connotation, what was being portrayed in the media, then we can't see the benefit or the rights of it or what it represents. And jihad being that great struggle to better themselves. And so fighting against domestic violence, inner city, fighting against lack of opportunity for women, my jihad is like, et cetera, against discrimination. And so my struggle, my drive is to fix these things. Trying to put a better perspective and understanding of these words so that they can be better understood by people. When something is put into such a negative light, sometimes having the discussion about it, people are closed-minded because they have a different idea of what these words mean altogether. Now, in the word, in jihad, meaning to fight or to go to war, one of the things that you will never see when we're talking about how these words are used and then how they affect the outcome of what people think about them, whether it's human rights or otherwise. If we said, for example, if jihad means war, and instead of saying that, if they use this words, for example, to apply to the U.S. Army, they're doing jihad to free ISIS, for example, then that would take on a completely different meaning for people. One of the responsibilities for us is to try to put into the proper context these words in order to be able to make clear at least what an Islamic perspective is about these things and about what human rights is. For example, someone asked me about this concept. Do people think about doing jihad? I said, well, let me give you an example. I was giving a talk to a group of students. It was at a Jewish school, not a very pro-Palestine Jewish school. And when I was giving the talk, they asked, well, what do you think about jihad? I said, look, can I give you an example about jihad? And they, yes, eagerly wanted to hear. I said, okay. There's a scholar, for example, one of the Maraja, one of the scholars, I think it was Ayatollah Sistani. He said he commanded for jihad for the people of Iraq to take up arms and to fight against ISIS. I said, this is an example of men and women who are Muslim who are going up and fighting against terrorists. This is an example of jihad. I said, this is not jihad. Muslims are fighting against terror. It's just completely, could not compute, doesn't register. This is totally different from what I was always told. What do you mean? How can this? Yes, this is a specific. So this is a reference. You can look here, this place, and put into perspective from our view, right? And it says that when you want to read history, you have to read it from the point of view of the oppressed, not the oppressor, right? Or from the point of view of the people who are actually read about the history. Thanksgiving is coming up. Learn about Thanksgiving from the point of view of Native Americans, okay? From indigenous people. Don't read about the version of what Christopher Columbus or whoever liked him so much. Listen to what the views are about indigenous people. Now we have Indigenous Peoples Day in a lot of places. It's changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, where people are saying Columbus wasn't any hero. What did he do that was so special? In fact, and besides in his writings, in some places it narrates that he wrote that these people are so kind. They give you whatever you want. If you ask for something, they will give you anything that they have. Yeah, we could take 50 men and subjugate all of them. We could enslave all of these people. That's what he's writing, or his thoughts are about the indigenous people. So something like this is not going to, give the right portrayal of what Thanksgiving and what all these things are representing if we look at it from the other side of the picture. There's a person who, in response to My Jihad Is campaign, which was trying to give a accurate or more accurate, positive description or explanation of what jihad is from an Islamic perspective, they decided, a very anti-Muslim blogger, commentator, you may have heard of her name is Pamela Geller. So what she did was she started an anti-campaign, My Jihad Is, and trying to make negative things. So she would say, My Jihad Is, and then she would find, like, for example, a quote that was attributed to bin Laden and put that on there. So at the same time that Muslims were trying to give a positive on billboards, maybe on buses and everything like that, at the same time somebody comes and wants to do the opposite to make sure that this negative image is maintained. Because if you are able to maintain the negative image, then why would anybody want to know anything about Islam? Why would anybody listen to what human rights is from an Islamic standpoint? Why would anybody want to hear anything because of that negative connotation? One of the things we can do is try to change the language and how we use the language, the same way that this group was doing. There's a Facebook page called Radical Muslims, right? And we know radical is one of those words also that's been used and always to have something negative. And before it was always used to be something negative in this way. Radical it could have a good meaning. It could be slang for being something really cool, right? And so Radical Muslims, this Facebook page, is a page about Muslims doing really cool things. So as a Muslim girl, she's in full hijab and she's surfing. And she says Radical Muslims. This is what Radical Muslims are doing. They're surfing, they're skateboarding, they're doing all these other kinds of really fun and cool things. This is radical, right? Changing the narrative or trying to change that image which has been implanted in the minds of the masses. It's possible. Each person takes their opportunity to change this narrative or to put a different perspective that can change, a lot of things in society. Another example of this is there was a popular journalist who was a White House reporter, Helen Thomas. She had a Lifetime Achievement Award and everything like that. She was actually of Arab descent. And so one of the statements, she was very pro-Palestine, and she was a patient of Palestine, Israel occupying Palestine. And so she would speak out against this. One by, and she said that I think that something along Thomas said. And so this was taken and put into, very explained, her reasons that, there's no reason for people to take someone else's land. Like someone's living in a house, no reason to not accept someone coming and saying, I want to live here. You're having dinner, you're sitting with your family, somebody comes and says, I like your house, I'm going to bulldoze it, I'm going to take it. It doesn't make any sense to anyone. And one true American hero is Rachel Corrie. She was a young woman who stood up against this kind of injustice. She believed in human rights, and as a young, maybe 20-something-year-old, she was traveling abroad. She was in Palestine, and she was protesting about these troops. Israeli troops were bulldozing the people's homes that people may be living in, actually, and taking that, property illegally. Occupation is illegal. And so against international law, the things that they were doing completely illegal, she wanted to protest these things. Her story is very fascinating. If you get a chance to go to the website of Rachel Corrie Foundation and read her emails, they're very moving. They're very, very moving. The things that she says and what she saw, what she witnessed, and how she wanted to try to change the world, and what she saw. She saw injustice. She saw inhumane treatment of human beings, of children, of women. She said, this is not women's rights. This is not human rights. And she wanted to stand up against it. The end result, unfortunately, is that this young lady who's sitting and standing and protesting, she gets bulldozed because they want to live there, because somebody wants to buy it or live there. It's really sad, the whole story of Rachel Corrie. But this is an example of human rights. So anyway, Helen Thomas is talking about this injustice that's happening in Palestine, and she got a lot of flack for that. And one of the first things that they said was responses. Well, if you don't agree with what's happening, you don't think that we can bulldoze those homes, you're anti-Semitic. And part of the problem with statements like this is that the people, even the people who say them, do not really understand them. Do not really think about them. And her response, which was a good and accurate response, is that I'm a Semite. Semite, she being of Arab descent, she is a Semite. She said, how can I be anti-Semitic when I myself am a Semite? And so she said, well, the talk show person gets all tangled up and confused, right? But putting into perspective and understanding what these things mean and using them in the right way goes a long way in anything else that wants to be achieved, as far as whether it's sharing the message of what Islam represents or sharing the message of what true human rights are, understanding what words are being used publicly in the media and what words we can try to use. And the last example that I'm going to give is the example Sharia law. So this is also one of those things that's put into the media as being very scary, right? This is something that they use to scare people, as used as a very as a word that asks the average person what it is. Some of the supporters of certain politicians nowadays ask them what it is. If you see the videos, they have no idea, but they're just saying it's something very bad. It means that, something just negative. And so what does this mean? And how can we put this into some better context and explanation for people? One of those things is, for example, when we say Sharia, we're talking about the Islamic legislation, the laws as per what Islam, or especially in an Islamic government, which would be carried out. So one of those things, for example, is how a chicken is slaughtered. This is, according to Sharia law, a chicken should be slaughtered in this way, right? So that shouldn't be so very scary, right? That, these things. It's really interesting. There's a YouTube video that's about the same Pamela Geller, and it said, if you Google Pamela Geller halal turkey, you're going to see this video. Because she was opposed to one company that decided that they're going to make all halal turkey, right? All zabiyah, halal turkeys, so that people, Muslims, and if you're not Muslim, you can buy it, but if you're Muslim, at least you have an option, something if you want to buy. Usually around that time in November, turkeys are a time that they can get, if people want to try them or have them. And so she made a whole stance about why you should not support halal turkey. She went out of her way to promote and do advertising against halal turkey. So one news reporter was explaining, what is this halal turkey? This turkey that's been killed according to Sharia law, which is very scary. What does it mean? So, and you explain into detail, it puts it into totally different perspective. Halal turkey means that this turkey is not allowed to suffer. It means that this turkey cannot be contaminated or sick. It means that this turkey, when it is slaughtered, a sharp object, a sharp knife is used, and all of the veins are cut at once so that the turkey does not suffer. Water is given to animals before they're being slaughtered. Or it's recommended that these animals are not slaughtered in front of other animals. This is what halal is. And people, when they're explained to this, they say, my God, this is the best thing to ever happen to the food industry. Because when we see the way that animals are being so mistreated, animal rights are something that is completely foreign. There's articles about how some of these things that they're selling at fast food restaurants, one article is about McDonald's specifically. It says, this is not fit for human consumption. The way the process of what this goes through, no human being should be eating that. It's that vile and dangerous. So what the reporter was saying is that, well, if you want to follow Pamela Geller, then you get a turkey, clobber it on the head with a blunt object, and make sure you strangle it to death, and make sure it's contaminated. Then it's not halal. One would say, well, I don't want something like that. Into perspective, what these words actually mean allows us to be able to better describe what human rights actually is. And we require and ask for that tawfiq during these months of Muharram and Safar, where we were reflecting back on that struggle of Imam Husayn. We were reflecting back on the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. And we hope and pray that inshallah Allah gives us this tawfiq, that it doesn't start and end with Ashura and Arba'een, that it becomes something that we practice all the time throughout every day of the year, and we are instruments of sharing this proper message ourselves whenever we can, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give all mu'mineen the tawfiq to see the right path and to stay on the right path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive all the shortcomings and mistakes that we may have made.